The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty courtyard, but Martha felt no warmth from its rays. She knelt in the dirt, her hands folded in her lap, while the entire Hartley clan formed a circle around her. 6 months had passed since Thomas died in that hunting accident. 6 months since she'd become a widow at 23. And now they'd finally decided what to do with her. "Barren," spat Constance Hartley, Thomas's mother, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. 4 years of marriage and not one child. Not even a miscarriage to show she tried. Martha kept her eyes on the ground. The packed earth beneath her knees had been swept clean that morning. She'd done it herself, not knowing she'd be kneeling in it by noon. Her black mourning dress, carefully mended and pressed, was already dusty at the hem. She brought curse to this family. Constance continued, pacing around Martha like a vulture. "My boy was strong as an ox before she came, never sick a day in his life. Then she arrives with her pretty face and empty womb, and look what happened." The townspeople watched from beyond the fence. Martha recognized Mrs. Patterson from the general store, Mr. Carlyle the blacksmith, young Amy Morrison who'd always smiled at her after church. None of them met her eyes now. They'd come to witness justice. Constance had announced, "Justice for a son taken too soon." "Stand up," Constance commanded. Martha rose slowly, her legs trembling from kneeling. She stood straight, though everything in her wanted to run. But where would she go? This town was 2 days' ride from anywhere, and she had no family left, no money of her own. Everything belonged to the Hartleys. Constance produced a pair of shears from her apron, old ones, spotted with rust, the kind used for sheep. The crowd murmured. Martha's hand involuntarily went to her hair. The long auburn braid that Thomas used to say caught fire in the lamplight. "A vanity," Constance said. "That's what trapped my boy, this hair, these looks that promised healthy babies but delivered nothing." 2 of Thomas's brothers stepped forward, Samuel and James. They'd eaten at her table countless times, complimented her cooking, thanked her for mending their shirts. Now Samuel grabbed her arms, holding them behind her back, while James forced her head down. The first cut made a sound like tearing fabric. Martha bit her lip hard enough to taste copper, determined not to cry out. Chunks of hair fell around her feet like autumn leaves. Constance worked methodically, not rushed, taking her time with each cut. The shears were dull and pulled painfully, but Martha remained silent. "There," Constance said finally. "Now everyone can see what you really are." Martha's scalp felt strange and cold. She could feel the uneven patches where Constance had cut close to the skin, other places where ragged tufts remained. The crowd was silent now, the morning air thick with disapproval, though whether for her or for what was being done to her, she couldn't tell. But Constance wasn't finished. She reached into the wooden bucket young Ruth Hartley carried and pulled out a handful of ash from the morning's cook fire, mixed with what looked like chimney soot. "The mark of shame," Constance announced, "so everyone knows what kind of woman walks among them." The ash was still warm as Constance smeared it across Martha's face, her forehead, her cheeks, around her eyes. It smelled of burnt wood and grease, and Martha had to fight not to gag. The old woman's fingers were rough, pressing the mixture into Martha's skin until it formed a mask of gray and black. "You killed my son," Constance whispered, close enough that only Martha could hear. "Maybe not with your hands, but with your barren body, your cursed presence. I should drive you out naked, but I'm a Christian woman." She stepped back, surveying her work. Martha stood there, shorn and marked, while 50 people stared. In the crowd, she saw Thomas's cousin Elizabeth turn away. They'd quilted together every Tuesday, behind the fence. The Morrison girl was crying silently. "You're no longer welcome in this family," Constance announced loudly. "No longer welcome in this town. Take nothing that belongs to the Hartleys. Leave, and don't come back." Martha looked down at herself, the wedding ring on her finger, the boots Thomas had bought her last Christmas. Even the dress she wore had been a gift from the family when she'd first arrived as a bride. She understood. They wanted her to beg, to plead, to promise anything if they'd just let her stay. Instead, she reached down and removed the ring, placing it carefully on the ground. Then the boots, though the thought of walking barefoot through the desert made her stomach clench. She couldn't remove the dress, not here, not with everyone watching, but she unpinned the cameo brooch at her throat, Constance's wedding gift, and set it beside the ring. "The dress," Constance began. "I'll leave it at the edge of town," Martha said. Her voice came out steady, though her throat felt full of sand. "I won't take what isn't mine." She turned and began walking toward the gate. The crowd parted silently. Nobody spoke. Nobody tried to stop her. Nobody offered help. Her bare feet found the packed dirt of Main Street, still cool in the morning shadow. She walked past the church where she'd married Thomas, past the school where she'd hoped to send her children, past the cemetery where Thomas lay under a stone that called him beloved son and husband, at the general store. She paused. Through the window, she could see bolts of fabric she'd admired, the coffee grinder she'd used every week, the ledger where the Hartley account would show her purchases, thread, flour, sugar, all the ordinary things of a life that was no longer hers. Behind her, she could hear footsteps. The crowd was following at a distance, making sure she really left. She didn't look back. At the town's edge, near the last building, a falling down shed that had once been somebody's hope for a business, Martha stopped. True to her word, she stepped behind the structure and removed the dress, standing for a moment in her chemise and petticoat before folding the black fabric carefully and placing it on a wooden crate. The desert stretched before her, endless and shimmering. The road to Millbrook was that way, 2 days on horseback. God knew how long on foot. She had no water, no food, no shoes, no hat to protect her shorn head from the sun. But she had her life, and she had her silence, and she had the knowledge that she'd given them no satisfaction of tears or pleas. Martha stepped onto the desert road. The packed earth gave way to looser soil, scattered with rocks that bit into her feet. Behind her, she could hear voices, some satisfied, some uneasy. Ahead, she saw only emptiness and heat shimmer. She made it perhaps a mile before her feet began to bleed, leaving small red marks on the pale earth. Another mile before the sun climbed high enough to beat down on her exposed scalp. The ash on her face had dried and cracked, pulling at her skin. Her throat burned with thirst, but she kept walking, step after step, breath after breath, because stopping would mean they'd won. Stopping would mean Thomas had married a weak woman after all. And Martha might be many things, barren, cursed, marked with shame. But she wasn't weak. It was when the sun reached its peak, when her shadow had shrunk to a small pool at her feet and the world had become nothing but glare and pain, that she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Single rider, moving steady but not rushed, coming from ahead, not behind. Martha didn't look up. If it was someone from town come to finish what Constance had started, she'd face it standing. If it was a stranger, well, what stranger would help a woman marked as she was? The hoofbeats slowed, then stopped. A shadow fell across her path, horse and rider, blocking the worst of the sun. Martha finally raised her eyes. The man was Apache. That much was clear from his dress and the way he sat his horse. Tall, even-mounted, broad-shouldered, with eyes so dark they seemed to hold their own shadows. He studied her for a long moment, her shorn head, her ash-marked face, her bleeding feet, her dusty undergarments. His expression didn't change, showed neither pity nor disgust nor surprise. Then he swung down from his horse in one fluid motion, reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a blanket. Not charity in his movements, not pity. Just the same matter-of-fact way a man might cover a fire for the night or shelter grain from rain. He held it out to her. Martha looked at the blanket, good wool, well made, cleaner than anything she'd touched in months. Then she looked at him, still no judgment in those dark eyes. Just waiting. She took the blanket. The blanket was heavier than Martha expected and warmer. She wrapped it around herself, covering her chemise and petticoat, and for the first time since kneeling in the Hartley courtyard, she felt something other than shame. Not pride exactly, but a small return of dignity. The Apache man studied her for another moment, then spoke. His voice was deep, quiet, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume. "You're coming with me." Not a question, not a command either. Exactly, just a statement of what would happen, as simple as saying the sun would set or the seasons would turn. Martha found herself nodding. She didn't know this man, didn't know where he meant to take her, didn't know if she could trust him. But she knew the alternative, continuing barefoot into the desert until the sun or thirst or wild animals finished what the Hartleys had started. He turned back to his horse, a paint mare with intelligent eyes, and adjusted something on the saddle. Then he looked at Martha, waiting. She understood and approached slowly, her cut feet making each step careful. Without asking, he bent and lifted her onto the horse as easily as hefting a sack of grain, though his hands were careful, touching only where necessary to help her mount. He swung up behind her, reaching around to take the reins. Martha had ridden before, but always side saddle, always proper. Now she sat astride, the blanket preserving what modesty she could claim, this stranger's presence at her back both foreign and strangely steadying. They rode in silence. The horse's gait was smooth, and the man directed her away from the main road, onto paths Martha hadn't known existed. The sun still blazed overhead, but the worst of its heat was broken by the speed of their passage and the shelter of his shadow. She wanted to ask where they were going, wanted to ask his name, why he'd stopped, why he'd helped, but her throat was too dry, and somehow the silence felt right. Not comfortable, she wasn't sure she'd ever be comfortable again, but appropriate. Words would have made it all smaller somehow. Would have required explanations and justifications and all the things she had no strength for. They rode for what might have been hours. The landscape changed gradually, scattered juniper giving way to pinyon pine, flat earth rising into hills. Martha dozed despite herself, exhaustion finally overwhelming vigilance. She woke when the horse slowed, picking her way down a narrow trail she wouldn't have seen without knowing it was there. Below them, tucked into a natural fold of the land near a canyon edge, sat a dwelling, not a house like those in town, but an Apache wickiup, its dome shape covered with brush and canvas. Smoke rose from a fire pit outside, and she could see the glint of water, a spring emerging from the rocks nearby. The man dismounted first, then helped her down. Her legs nearly buckled, but she forced them steady. He led the horse to a lean-to shelter and began removing the saddle, his movements efficient and practiced. Martha stood uncertain, the blanket clutched around her, watching. "Sit," he said without looking at her, gesturing toward a flat stone near the fire. She sat. The stone had been warming in the afternoon sun and felt good against her legs. She watched him tend the horse, noticed the care in how he checked her hooves, the gentle way he spoke to her in words Martha didn't understand. When he finished, He went into the wickiup and emerged with a wooden bowl and a gourd dipper. The spring water was cold and sweet. Martha forced herself to drink slowly, though her body screamed for her to gulp it down. He watched, refilled the bowl when she emptied it, said nothing when she drained it again. Next, he brought a basket of water and clean cloth. He set them beside her and stepped back, turning his attention to the fire. Understanding. Martha wet the cloth and began washing the ash from her face. The water turned gray, then black. She poured it out away from the spring and refilled the basket, washing until her skin felt like her own again. Her hands went to her shorn head. In the still water, she caught her reflection, patchy, ragged, ugly. She looked away quickly. "Name," he said suddenly. She looked up. He was crouched by the fire, feeding it pinyon that released sweet smoke. "Martha," she said. Then, because it seemed important to say it all, "Martha, just Martha now." He nodded, as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. "I am Samuel." She almost laughed, bitter and wild. Another Samuel, so different from the one who'd held her arms while his mother shamed her. But she swallowed the sound, afraid if she started she wouldn't stop. "Why?" she asked instead. The single word held everything. Why help her? Why bring her here? Why show kindness to someone marked as cursed? He considered the question, still tending the fire. When he spoke, it was thoughtfully choosing each word. "My grandmother was Mexican, married my grandfather, lived with the peoples. When he died, his sisters said she brought bad luck, cut her hair, marked her face with charcoal, sent her walking." Martha waited. The fire crackled between them. "She walked 3 days. My mother's father found her, brought her to his family. She lived 50 years more, had 6 children, died an old woman, respected." He looked at Martha directly. "You did not beg." Such a simple statement. But Martha felt tears prick her eyes for the first time all day. She blinked them back fiercely. "I have nothing," she said. "No money, no family, no—" "You have yourself," Samuel interrupted. "That is not nothing." He rose and went back into the wickiup, returning with folded fabric. Clothes, a simple cotton skirt, a loose blouse, both well worn but clean. He set them beside her along with a pair of moccasins, then walked away toward the canyon edge, giving her privacy. Martha changed quickly, her fingers fumbling with unfamiliar fastenings. The clothes were too big but comfortable, and the moccasins soft on her torn feet. She folded the blanket carefully and placed her undergarments beside it, unsure what else to do. When Samuel returned, he nodded approval. He picked up her chemise and petticoat without comment and fed them to the fire. Martha watched the last ties to her old life curl and blacken, sending sparks up into the deepening sky. "Hungry?" he asked. She nodded, suddenly aware of the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. He brought dried meat, flatbread, and something that might have been dried berries mixed with fat. Simple food. But Martha ate carefully, gratefully, while the sun sank toward the horizon. "You live here alone?" she asked finally. "Yes, sometimes go to the reservation, sometimes scout for the army, mostly here." "And I can stay?" He looked at her, that same steady assessment as when he'd first seen her on the road. "You can stay. You can go. Your choice." "Where would I go?" "Town is 2 days that way." He pointed east. "Reservation is 3 days that way. North. Mexico is 5 days that way. South. And if I stay, then you stay." He began banking the fire for the night. Martha helped, moving by instinct, the way she'd helped Thomas bank their fire every evening. But this was different. Samuel didn't direct her or correct her, just worked alongside, accepting her help as natural. When darkness fell completely, he showed her into the wickiup. It was warmer than she'd expected, the brush walls keeping out the wind that had begun to rise. He'd laid out bedding, blankets and a buffalo hide, on one side. His own bedding was on the other, the fire pit between them. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow, if you stay, we'll treat your feet properly. Cut your hair even so it grows back right." Martha lay down, pulling the blankets up to her chin. Through the smoke hole above, she could see stars beginning to emerge. Samuel settled on his own bedding, and soon his breathing deepened into sleep. But Martha lay awake, her mind racing. This morning she'd been Martha Hartley, widow, citizen of Rock Springs, member, however unwelcome, of society. Tonight she was... what? A refugee? A charity case? A woman with shorn hair sleeping in an Apache dwelling with a man she'd met hours ago? Yet she felt safer than she had in months. Not safe exactly. She might never feel truly safe again, but not threatened. Samuel had offered her choices, stay or go, eat or starve, live or die, all hers to make. After months of having no choices at all, it felt like wealth. The wind picked up outside, and she heard coyotes calling in the distance. Martha pulled the blankets higher and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would have to decide. Tonight, for the first time since Thomas died, she would simply sleep. Martha woke to the sound of water and birdsong. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, the brush walls, the smell of sage and smoke, the unfamiliar blankets. Then it came back, the shearing, the ash, the long walk, Samuel's steady presence. She sat up slowly. Her feet throbbed, but it was a clean pain, healing pain. Through the entrance of the wickiup, she could see morning light painting the canyon walls gold and rose. Samuel was already up, crouched by the fire, something simmering in a pot. He looked up as she emerged, nodded once. "Coffee," he said, pouring dark liquid into a tin cup. It was stronger than she was used to, bitter with grounds. But Martha drank gratefully. The warmth spread through her chest, chasing away the desert morning chill. She sat on the same flat stone as yesterday, watching him work. "Your feet," he said after a while, "need tending." He brought a basket of water, cleaner cloth, and a small pot of something that smelled of pine pitch and herbs. Martha unwrapped the makeshift bandages he'd applied the night before, wincing at the raw places. Samuel worked without comment, cleaning each cut, applying the salve, rewrapping with fresh cloth. His hands were careful but not gentle, practical, focused on the task. "Thank you," Martha said when he finished. He sat back on his heels, studying his work. "You'll heal. Few days, maybe a week." A week. The thought of staying even that long felt strange. But where else would she go on feet too damaged to walk? "Your hair," he said next. "Want me to cut it even or leave it?" Martha's hand went involuntarily to her head. In daylight, she could feel the full extent of Constance's work, patches nearly bare, others with ragged chunks of varying lengths. "I cut it," she said quietly. "Please." He brought scissors, real ones, sharp and clean, and a comb. Martha sat very still while he worked, feeling the gentle tugs as he evened out the damage. Hair fell around her again, but differently this time. No audience, no shame, just careful repair of cruelty. When he finished, he handed her a small mirror. Martha almost refused, then steeled herself and looked. Her hair was short as a boy's now, but even. Without the weight of her long braid, it showed a slight wave she'd never noticed before. She looked older, harder, but also somehow more herself. Better, Samuel said. It wasn't a question. The day developed its own rhythm. Samuel went about his tasks, checking trap lines, gathering plants, maintaining tools, while Martha found herself falling into familiar patterns. She swept the area around the wickiup with a bundle of grass. She organized the supplies she found, putting like with like. When Samuel brought back rabbits from his traps, she cleaned them without being asked, her hands remembering the motion. He watched her work, said nothing, but she saw approval in his silence. As the sun climbed higher, Martha washed clothes at the spring, his and hers both, scrubbing them on the flat rocks, spreading them on bushes to dry. The simple task felt like reclaiming something. At the Hartley house, laundry had been a burden. Another chore for a daughter-in-law who couldn't provide grandchildren. Here, it was just clothes getting clean, sun warm on her back, water cold on her hands. When she returned to the fire, Samuel had set out food, more flatbread, dried meat, but also fresh greens he'd gathered and nuts from his stores. They ate in companionable silence. Then he surprised her by speaking. "You cook?" "Yes." "Good. I trap, hunt, trade. But cooking?" He shrugged. "Enough to live, not enough to enjoy." It was the longest speech she'd heard from him. Martha found herself almost smiling. "I can cook, if you have supplies. Tomorrow we go to the trading post and get what you need." "I have no money. I have pelts to trade. When you cook, I hunt. Fair." Fair. When had anyone last offered her a fair trade? Not charity, not duty, just simple exchange of skills. That afternoon, while Samuel worked on stretching a hide, Martha explored the small camp. Everything had its place. Tools hung on a wooden frame, food stored in baskets and parfleches, firewood stacked neatly under an overhang. It spoke of someone who'd lived alone a long time, who'd made peace with solitude. She found where he'd buried her hair, a small mound of freshly turned earth near a pinyon tree, marked with a circle of stones. The sight made her throat tight. She knelt beside it, not praying exactly, but acknowledging. That hair had been her vanity, yes, but also her history. Every inch had grown during her marriage, had been brushed and braided through good times and bad. Now it would feed the earth, become part of this place she'd never expected to see. "Apache way," Samuel said behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. "Hair holds spirit, should return to earth with respect." Constance wanted to shame me. She shamed herself. His voice held quiet certainty. "You walked away with dignity. She stays trapped in her own bitterness." Martha stood brushing dirt from her skirt. "How do you know I didn't deserve it? Maybe I am cursed, maybe I did." "You think you caused your husband's death?" The direct question stopped her short. No. He was hunting. His horse spooked, but I couldn't give him children, couldn't." "My wife died," Samuel interrupted. 5 winters ago, fever took her. Some said I should have called the white doctor sooner. Some said I should have used traditional medicine only. Everyone had opinions about what I did wrong. Martha looked at him, seeing new lines in his face, understanding the solitude differently. "Guilt is a heavy thing to carry," he continued. "Others will pile their own on top if you let them. But only you decide what's yours to bear." They stood together in the afternoon light. 2 people who'd lost spouses, who'd been blamed, who'd found themselves alone. The moment stretched, full of understanding that didn't need words. That evening, Martha made dinner with what she had. Rabbit stew seasoned with the wild onions Samuel had gathered. Flatbread made fresh on a hot stone. It wasn't fancy, but Samuel ate with obvious appreciation. Even took a second helping. "Good," he said simply. "Very good." After they'd cleaned up, settling by the fire as darkness fell, Martha finally asked what she'd wondered all day. "Why were you on that road yesterday?" Samuel poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up. "Wasn't planning to be. Was heading to the trading post. But my horse picked up a stone, stopped to dig it out, heard the commotion from town. Curious, so I waited to see what would happen. And you saw me. He saw them turn you out, saw you walk away with nothing but pride." He paused. "My grandmother would have liked you." Martha wrapped her arms around her knees, staring into the flames. "I don't know what I'm doing here. And no one knows what they're doing. We just do it anyway." She almost laughed at that, the simple truth of it. "And if I stay, really stay, then you learn this life. It's not easy. No neighbors to gossip with, no church socials, no store-bought pretty things, just work and weather and making do. I've had neighbors and church socials and pretty things. They didn't make me happy. Being alone doesn't make you happy either, just makes you alone. Are you happy?" He considered this, taking his time as he did with all questions. "Content. Most days. Lonely sometimes, but free. Free." The word sat between them like a promise. Martha tested it in her mind, tried to imagine what it might mean. Freedom to work or rest, speak or stay silent, live without measuring herself against another woman's expectations. "I'd like to try," she said quietly. "Staying, for a while." Samuel nodded as if she'd agreed to something as simple as tomorrow's weather. "Good. Trading post tomorrow. You make a list of what you need." He handed her a piece of charcoal and a flat piece of bark. Martha stared at it, then slowly began writing. Flour, salt, lard. The basics of a kitchen, of a life. With each item, she felt herself choosing not just ingredients, but a future different from any she'd imagined. When she finished, Samuel looked over the list, nodded. "We'll get most of this. Maybe all if the pelts trade well." They prepared for sleep as they had the night before. Separate sides of the wickiup, the banked fire between them. But as Martha lay in her blankets, she felt the space differently. Not strange anymore, but shelter. Not a man's charity, but a shared dwelling. "Samuel," she said into the darkness. "Yes?" "Thank you for stopping, for—" She couldn't finish, couldn't name all the things she was grateful for. "You're welcome, Martha." Her name in his careful pronunciation sounded different than it ever had. Not the preacher's wife, not the barren woman, not the cursed widow. Just Martha, learning to be free. She closed her eyes and listened to the night sounds, wind in the pines, the distant call of an owl, the settling of the fire. Tomorrow they would go to the trading post, and she would have to face people again, but not alone, and not as the woman she'd been yesterday, for the first time in months. Martha fell asleep without dreading the morning. The trading post sat 15 miles north, where 2 trails crossed and a seasonal creek provided water. Martha rode behind Samuel on his paint mare, her hands light on his waist, learning the rhythm of travel. The morning was cool, the sky pale blue and endless. They didn't speak much, but the silence felt companionable now. Martha watched the landscape change, red rock giving way to scrub pine, the ground rising and falling in gentle swells. Once, Samuel pointed to tracks in the dust. "Deer," he said. "Young buck, maybe yearling." Martha nodded, filing the information away. This was her world now, she should learn to read it. The trading post appeared around midday. A low adobe building with a wooden porch. A few horses tied at the rail. Samuel helped her down, then unloaded his pelts, beaver, rabbit, a particularly fine fox pelt that caught the light like fire. "You stay close," he said quietly, "Then, but don't hide." Martha understood. She was choosing this life, not being forced into it. That meant standing straight, meeting eyes, being visible even with her shorn head and borrowed clothes. Inside, the post was dim and smelled of leather, tobacco, and coffee beans. The trader, a wiry man named Hutchins, looked up from his ledger. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Martha, taking in her appearance, but Samuel stepped forward before questions could form. "Good pelts," Samuel said, laying them on the counter. "Need supplies?" Hutchins examined each pelt with professional interest, running his hands through the fur, checking for damage. While he calculated, Martha studied the shelves, bolts of fabric, tools, canned goods that seemed like luxury after days of dried meat and flatbread. $30 credit, Hutchins announced. "Fair price." Samuel nodded, gestured for Martha to give her list. She handed it over and Hutchins began gathering items, glancing at her periodically with poorly concealed curiosity. It was when he was measuring flour that the door opened. Martha's stomach clenched as she recognized the voice before she saw the face. Robert Morrison, from Rock Springs. His daughter Amy had been the one crying behind the fence. Morrison stopped mid-sentence when he saw her. His face went through several expressions: shock, pity, embarrassment, before settling on careful neutrality. "Mrs. Hartley," he said finally. "Mr. Morrison." Martha kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. She pressed them flat against her skirt. Morrison's eyes went to Samuel, back to Martha, understanding dawning. We heard you'd left town." "Yes." An awkward pause. Morrison cleared his throat. "Amy's been asking after you. She was upset by what happened. You give her my regards." Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Martha could see him struggling, wanting to say something about the injustice of her treatment, but not willing to criticize the Hartleys publicly. Finally, he just nodded and turned to Hutchins. "Need ammunition." 2 boxes. While Hutchins fetched the ammunition, Morrison kept glancing at Martha. She stood quietly beside Samuel, neither hiding nor inviting conversation. Let him look. Let him go back to Rock Springs with news of Thomas Hartley's widow trading at an outpost with an Apache man. The thought held no sting. She was beyond their reach now. After Morrison left, hurrying like a man fleeing contagion, Hutchins finished gathering their supplies. He threw in an extra pound of coffee, muttering something about good customers. Martha suspected it had more to do with Morrison's obvious discomfort, a small rebellion against the town's judgment. They loaded everything onto the horse: flour, cornmeal, salt, lard, dried beans, coffee, a length of calico. Martha hadn't asked for, but Samuel had added, and needles and thread. Real supplies for a real life, not charity or scraps. As they prepared to leave, a movement caught Martha's eye. A child, maybe 7 or 8, peering around the corner of the building, wild black hair, torn dress, the wariness of a half-feral cat. The child, Martha couldn't tell if it was boy or girl, watched them with intense dark eyes. Martha remembered being hungry at that age, after her parents died and before the church family took her in. She reached into their supplies and pulled out a piece of hardtack Hutchins had thrown in as a sample. Moving slowly, she placed it on the edge of the porch, then stepped back. The child didn't move until they were mounted and turning away. Then, quick as a rabbit, the small figure darted out, snatched the hardtack, and vanished again. "That's the Brennan girl," Samuel said as they rode away. "Parents died last winter. Lives wild now, stealing what she can. No one took her in. Tried. She runs away, always comes back here." Martha filed this information away too, though she wasn't sure why it mattered. One lost child among many in this hard land. The ride back was quiet, both of them thinking their own thoughts. Martha's mind kept returning to Morrison's face, the careful way he'd avoided condemning or condoning what had been done to her. That was how it would be now. She existed outside their world, neither respectable widow nor proper anything. The thought should have grieved her. Instead, she felt oddly light. Back at the wiki-up, they unloaded supplies together. Martha immediately set about organizing the cooking area, creating a proper workspace with flat stones for preparation, hooks for utensils, a covered area for food storage. Samuel watched her transform the space, occasionally offering a suggestion or helping move something heavy. By evening, she had produced their first real meal together: beans seasoned with wild herbs, fresh flatbread, coffee that didn't taste of grounds. Samuel ate with obvious pleasure, and Martha felt the deep satisfaction of skills appreciated, work valued. After dinner, while cleaning up, Martha noticed movement at the edge of the firelight. The child from the trading post stood there, barely visible, drawn perhaps by the smell of food. Martha didn't acknowledge the presence directly. Instead, she set aside a portion of beans and bread on a flat stone near the edge of camp, then went about her business. Samuel noticed but said nothing, understanding her intent. They sat by the fire as darkness deepened, Samuel working on a piece of leather, Martha mending a tear in her borrowed skirt with her new needle and thread. The child crept closer by degrees, finally reaching the food. But instead of snatching it and running, she settled cross-legged just outside the circle of firelight and ate slowly, watching them. "What's your name?" Martha asked quietly, not looking directly at the child. Silence. Then, so soft it might have been wind, "Rose." "I'm Martha. This is Samuel." Rose didn't respond, but she didn't run either. When she finished eating, she set the stone carefully back where she'd found it, a gesture of manners that spoke of teaching before loss. "There's water at the spring if you're thirsty," Martha offered. Rose considered this, then darted to the spring, drank quickly, and melted back into the darkness. But Martha could sense her still there, hovering at the edge of their small circle of civilization. "She'll be back," Samuel said quietly. "Should we let her choose, like you chose?" Martha understood. You couldn't force healing, couldn't drag someone into safety. They had to walk in themselves, when ready. Over the next days, a pattern developed. Martha worked to make the camp more homelike. She dug a proper fire pit for cooking, created shelves from flat stones and branches, even started a small garden with seeds Samuel had saved. The work felt different from her labors at the Hartley house. There, she'd been trying to earn her place, prove her worth. Here, she was simply building something that pleased her. Rose appeared each evening, accepting food, gradually staying longer. She never came fully into the light, but her presence became part of their routine. Sometimes Martha would talk quietly while she worked, not expecting response, describing what she was cooking, mentioning the weather, small things. Rose listened with the intensity of the starved, though whether for food or words was hard to say. One evening, as Martha pulled fresh bread from the coals, Rose spoke unprompted for the first time. "My mama made bread like that." Martha's hands stilled, but she kept her voice casual. "Did she teach you?" "Started to, before the fever." Carefully, Martha tore off a piece of the warm bread. "Would you like to help me tomorrow? I could use an extra pair of hands." Rose was silent so long Martha thought she'd pushed too hard. Then, maybe. It was enough. Martha set out Rose's portion as usual, but this time placed it closer to the fire. Rose hesitated, then moved forward to claim it, sitting near enough that firelight caught the edges of her matted hair. Samuel had been right about letting people choose. Martha thought of her own choice, that moment on the desert road when she'd taken the blanket from a stranger's hands. Not because she had to, but because the alternative was no longer bearable. That night, as she lay in her blankets listening to the wind, Martha felt something she hadn't expected. Purpose. Not the grand purpose she'd imagined as a young bride, mother to a large family, pillar of the church community. Something quieter but no less real. A safe place for a wild child to approach at her own pace. Good food made with care. A life built on reciprocity rather than obligation. She thought of Constance Hartley. Wondered if the woman ever regretted her cruelty. Probably not. People like that fed on their own righteousness, mistaking it for strength. But Martha found she no longer cared. That life, that woman who'd knelt in the dirt accepting judgment, felt like someone she'd known long ago. Here in the dark of the wickiup, with Samuel's quiet breathing across the fire and Rose somewhere in the shadows beyond. Martha was becoming someone new. Not the widow Hartley, not the cursed woman, not the barren wife. Just Martha, learning the shape of her own life, one day at a time. Tomorrow she would teach a half-wild child to make bread. She would tend her garden, trade work with Samuel, build something lasting from the ashes of her humiliation. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but increasingly, it felt like the life she was meant to find. The winds sang through the canyon, and Martha slept deeply, dreaming of bread rising and seeds sprouting and all the small resurrections that make a life. 6 weeks had passed since Martha walked out of Rock Springs barefoot and shorn. Now, as she stood at the edge of town, she barely recognized the woman reflected in the general store window. Her hair had grown to frame her face in soft waves. Her skin, burnished by sun and wind, no longer held the pallor of confined widowhood. The calico dress she'd sewn herself fit properly, and her feet in sturdy boots felt sure on the packed earth. Samuel waited with the wagon at the edge of town, understanding without words that this was something she needed to do alone. Rose sat beside him, still skittish around strangers but trusting enough to make the journey. The child's presence had become as natural as sunrise. She slept in a lean-to shelter they'd built together, helped with chores, and was slowly learning to read from Martha's patient teaching. Martha walked down Main Street with measured steps. It was market day, the town busy with ranchers and farmers. Conversations stopped as she passed. She felt the weight of their stares but didn't lower her eyes. Let them look. Let them see what their cruelty had wrought, not destruction but transformation. At the general store, she selected her items carefully. A bolt of sturdy cloth, new scissors, lamp oil, writing paper, necessities for the life she was building, paid for with money earned from selling her preserved goods and Samuel's pelts at the trading post. Mrs. Patterson was behind the counter, the same woman who'd watched in silence 6 weeks ago. Her face went through several expressions before settling on forced politeness. "That'll be $3.40, she said, not meeting Martha's eyes. Martha counted out the money, exact change. As Mrs. Patterson wrapped her purchases, the door chimed. Martha didn't need to turn to recognize the sharp intake of breath. Constance Hartley. "You dare show your face here?" The older woman's voice cracked like a whip. Martha turned slowly. Constance looked older, grayer, as if her own venom had begun poisoning her from within. Behind her stood James Hartley, Thomas's youngest brother, shifting uncomfortably. "I'm purchasing supplies," Martha said calmly. "Nothing more." Purchasing? With what money? What you stole from my family?" "I took nothing of yours." "You took my son." The accusation hung in the air. Around them, other shoppers pretended to examine goods while listening intently. Martha felt the old shame trying to rise, the urge to defend herself, to beg understanding. Instead, she thought of Samuel's words. "Only you decide what's yours to bear." "Thomas died in an accident," Martha said quietly but clearly. "I grieved him then. I grieve him still, but I won't carry your need for someone to blame." Constance's face went red, then white. "You're living in sin with that savage. Everyone knows. Robert Morrison saw you at the trading post, bold as brass." "I'm living," Martha said simply. "That seems to be what offends you most." A small voice piped up from near the door. "She knows how to make good bread." Everyone turned. Rose stood in the doorway, chin raised despite her obvious fear of the crowd. She'd followed Martha after all, loyal as a shadow. "She teaches me letters too," Rose continued, addressing Constance with the directness of childhood. "And she don't hit when I get them wrong." Constance's mouth opened and closed, temporarily robbed of words by this unexpected defense. James stepped forward, perhaps to escort his mother out, but she shook him off. "Judge Harris will hear of this," she hissed. "There are laws about maintaining proper conduct, about cutting a widow's hair and driving her into the desert without food or water." Martha interrupted. "Yes, perhaps Judge Harris should hear about that." The threat was empty. No judge would take her word over the Hartleys. But Constance stepped back as if slapped, perhaps remembering that there had been witnesses, that not everyone in town had approved of her actions. Martha turned back to Mrs. Patterson, who quickly handed over the wrapped purchases. As Martha walked toward the door, the crowd parted. Some faces showed hostility, others confusion. A few, like young Amy Morrison, shopping with her mother, something that might have been admiration. At the door, Martha paused and looked back at Constance. "I forgive you," she said. "Not for your sake, but for mine. I hope someday you find the peace you denied me." She left before Constance could respond, Rose trotting beside her like a fierce small guardian. Behind them, the buzz of gossip rose like disturbed bees. Outside, the sun felt clean on her face. Martha breathed deeply, feeling lighter with each step away from the store. She'd faced them, faced her past, and found it had no power over her anymore. "That was the mean woman who cut your hair," Rose said, not asking. "Yes? I don't like her." "You don't have to. But we don't need to carry hate either. It's too heavy for the journey we're on." Rose considered this with the seriousness she brought to all Martha's teachings. "Like when you told me to leave the heavy rocks behind when we gathered clay." "Exactly like that." They reached the wagon where Samuel waited. His eyes asked questions, but he merely helped them up, noting the parcels that proved successful shopping. As they pulled away from town, Martha looked back once. Rock Springs looked smaller than she remembered, its judgments and restrictions as confining as a cage she'd finally learned to unlock. "Go all right?" Samuel asked once they'd cleared the town limits. "Yes, better than all right." He nodded, satisfied. They rode in comfortable silence, Rose between them on the bench, occasionally pointing out hawks or interesting cloud formations. The child who'd barely spoken 6 weeks ago now chattered like a creek in spring, secure in their patient attention. As they traveled home, and when had she started thinking of the Wickiup as home, Martha reflected on the encounter. She'd expected to feel triumph or vindication. Instead, she felt only a quiet settling, like sediment finding its level after a storm. Constance's hatred belonged to Constance. The town's judgment belonged to the town. None of it was hers to carry anymore. They stopped at the trading post on the way back. Word traveled fast in the territory, and Hutchins greeted Martha with new respect. "They heard you face down the old dragon," he said, measuring out the coffee she requested. About time someone did. Martha neither confirmed nor denied, simply completed her business. But she noticed he added an extra portion of sugar to their order, winking at Rose, who received it with delight. As they prepared to leave, a familiar figure emerged from behind the post. The Brennan girl wasn't the only lost child who haunted this crossroads. A boy this time, maybe 10, with the hollow look of hunger Martha recognized too well. Without thinking, she reached into their supplies and pulled out hardtack and dried fruit, setting it where the boy could reach it. Samuel watched with approval, Rose with understanding. This too was part of their pattern now, taking in the lost, feeding the hungry, creating small circles of safety in a hard world. The boy snatched the food but didn't run. "You're the lady who lives with the Apache," he said around a mouthful of hardtack. "I live with my family," Martha corrected gently. "And yes, Samuel is Apache." The boy studied Samuel with more curiosity than fear. "My pa said Apaches steal children. Some people say many untrue things," Samuel said mildly. "Best to judge by what you see, not what you hear." The boy seemed to consider this, then nodded and melted back into the scrubland. Martha suspected they'd see him again. Word spread among the lost children as surely as among the town gossips. The rest of the journey passed peacefully. As they neared home, Martha saw smoke rising from their fire, but more than usual. Samuel noticed too, his hand moving instinctively toward his rifle. But as they rounded the final bend, they saw the source. A small band of Apache had made camp near the spring. Samuel relaxed, recognizing them. "My cousin," he explained, "brings news sometimes." The visitors, 2 men, a woman, and an elderly grandmother, greeted Samuel warmly in Apache. Their eyes went to Martha and Rose with open curiosity but no hostility. The woman stepped forward, said something to Samuel, then approached Martha with a smile. "She says you must be the woman who feeds children," Samuel translated. "Word travels." Martha found herself smiling back, offering her hands in greeting. The woman clasped them, her grip firm and welcoming. She spoke rapidly to Samuel, gesturing at Martha's hair, her dress, the confident way she stood. "She says you look like someone who has found her path." Samuel translated, his own smile warming his usually serious face. "Also that your hair is growing back strong. This is good sign." The evening became an unexpected celebration. The visitors shared venison. Martha contributed her preserved vegetables and fresh bread, and soon they had a feast. Rose, initially shy, was coaxed out by the grandmother, who produced a corn-husk doll from her bags, showing the girl how to braid its hair. Martha found herself absorbed into the women's work naturally, helping prepare food, learning a few Apache words, communicating through gestures and smiles when language failed. The conversation flowed around her in 2 languages, Samuel translating the important parts, but much of it needing no translation. Laughter, children's games, the satisfaction of shared work. As night fell and the visitors prepared sleeping places, the woman who'd first greeted Martha pressed something into her hands, a pair of finely beaded moccasins, soft as butter and beautiful beyond anything Martha had owned. "For your new path," Samuel translated. "She says every woman needs good shoes for the journey ahead." Martha's eyes stung with unexpected tears. She'd been cast out by her own people, marked and shamed and discarded. But here, among strangers who owed her nothing, she'd found welcome, not pity or charity, but recognition, one woman acknowledging another's courage. That night, as the extended camp settled into sleep, Martha lay awake listening to the mix of voices, the crackle of the larger fire, the sense of community that had sprung up unexpectedly. Rose slept curled between her and the grandmother. The corn-husk doll clutched tight. Samuel's steady breathing came from his usual place, a constant now in the rhythm of their days. Tomorrow the visitors would move on, following their own paths. But tonight, Martha felt the threads of connection stretching out, to the trading post children who would remember kindness, to the Apache woman who saw her truly, to this man and child who'd become her family through choice rather than law. She thought of Constance Hartley, alone with her bitterness, and felt the last of her anger dissolve into something closer to pity. How terrible to have family all around and yet be so alone. To have power over others but no peace in yourself. Martha pulled her blanket higher and closed her eyes. In the morning, she would wear her new moccasins. She would teach Rose more letters. She would work alongside Samuel in the easy partnership they'd developed. She would be Martha, not defined by what she'd lost or what others had taken, but by what she chose to build. The fire popped, sending sparks toward stars that watched, indifferent and eternal, over all the small human dramas below. But here in this circle of warmth and acceptance, those dramas seemed less small, each choice to extend kindness, to offer shelter, to share food rippling outward like water in a still pool, changing the shape of the world one small act at a time. The first snow came early that year, dusting the canyon rim while the aspens still held half their gold. Martha woke to Rose's excited chatter about the white world outside, but Samuel's usual morning sounds were absent. His bedroll lay empty, the fire cold. He went hunting yesterday evening, Rose said, less concerned than Martha. Said he'd seen elk sign up the North Ridge. But Samuel was never gone overnight without word. Martha kept her worry from her face as she built up the fire and started breakfast, though her eyes went often to the horizon. By midday, with snow beginning to fall in earnest, she made her decision. Stay here, she told Rose. Keep the fire going. If Samuel returns, tell him I went north. Rose's face showed she wanted to argue, but something in Martha's expression stopped her. You'll be careful? Always. Martha dressed warmly, her old wool cloak over the Apache dress she now favored, the beaded moccasins replaced with sturdy boots. She took rope, bandages, a knife, and what food she could carry easily. The rifle Samuel had taught her to use went across her back. The snow fell heavier as she climbed, following the trail Samuel would have taken. She'd learned tracking from him these past months, and even with snow covering the ground, she found signs, a broken branch here, a sheltered spot where he'd stopped to rest there. By late afternoon, the trail led into a narrow ravine. Martha's unease grew. The snow made footing treacherous, and the light was failing. Then she heard it, a low groan, barely audible over the wind. She found him at the bottom of a steep slope, his leg bent at an angle that made her stomach clench. His face was gray with pain and cold, but his eyes opened when she called his name. Told you, stubborn elk, he managed through chattering teeth. Martha didn't waste time on relief or scolding. She assessed quickly, broken legs certainly, possible ribs from how he held his side, and who knew how long he'd been lying in the cold. Moving him would be agony, but leaving him here meant death. This will hurt, she warned, fashioning a splint from branches and rope. Samuel nodded, jaw clenched. When she straightened the leg, he made no sound, but his knuckles went white where he gripped the ground. Martha worked fast, binding the leg, then faced the real challenge, getting him out of the ravine. She couldn't carry him, but she could support him, inch by agonizing inch. They made their way up the slope. Samuel leaned heavily on her, each step drawing sharp breaths of pain. The snow made everything slippery, and twice they nearly fell back down. Leave me, Samuel said when they paused to rest. Get help. No. Martha didn't elaborate. The nearest help was the trading post, hours away in good weather. By the time she returned, if she could find anyone willing to help an Apache man, he'd be frozen. She wrapped her cloak around both of them, sharing warmth, and they continued. Her world narrowed to the next step, the next breath, the next moment of keeping them both upright. Her shoulders screamed, her feet went numb, but she didn't stop. Dark had fallen completely when she finally saw the faint glow of their fire. Rose had built it up like a beacon. The child ran to meet them, her face tight with fear that dissolved into determination. "What do I do?" was all she asked. Together, they got Samuel inside the wickiup. Martha sent Rose for water while she cut away his leggings to examine the break. Clean, thank God, the bone not piercing skin. She'd helped her mother set bones as a girl before the fever took her. The knowledge came back, hands remembering what her mind had half forgotten. He rose. "I need straight sticks, thick as your thumb, and more rope." While the child gathered supplies, Martha built up the fire and heated water. Samuel's skin was too cold, his breathing shallow. Shock and exposure on top of the injury. Each alone could kill. Together they certainly would without care. She worked through the night, set the bone while Samuel bit down on leather to muffle his groans. Cleaned and bound his ribs. Forced warm broth between his lips when he tried to refuse. Changed cold compresses to bring down the fever that soon raged. Rose proved invaluable, fetching and carrying without complaint, instinctively knowing what was needed. When Samuel's fever spiked near dawn, the child began singing softly, Apache songs she'd learned from his cousin's visit, her voice thin but true. Whether it helped or not, Martha couldn't say, but it seemed to calm his restless movements. For 3 days, Martha barely left his side. She dozed in snatches, always waking when his breathing changed. Rose took over the simple cooking, proud to be trusted with keeping them all fed. On the 3rd night, Samuel's fever finally broke, sweat beading his forehead as his body won its battle. He woke properly on the 4th morning, clear-eyed and present. Martha was grinding herbs for a poultice when she felt his gaze. "You came for me," he said. His voice was rough but wondering. "You would have done the same." "Yes, but I'm used to walking alone and didn't expect—" He stopped, searching for words. Martha set aside the herbs, meeting his eyes. "You're not alone anymore, neither am I. That's what we chose, isn't it?" Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down that she hadn't even realized was there. He reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on the blanket. Not possession, not demand, just connection. Martha, just her name, but waited with everything unsaid. Rose chose that moment to burst in with fresh snow for water, chattering about rabbit tracks near the spring. The moment passed, but its warmth lingered. As Martha helped Samuel sit up to eat, she noticed his eyes following her with new intensity, seeing her perhaps truly for the first time, not as a refugee he'd rescued, but as the woman who'd risked everything to bring him home. Recovery was slow. Samuel, used to strength and self-sufficiency, chafed at the restrictions, but Martha was immovable. He would heal properly or not at all. She enlisted Rose as enforcer, the child delighting in ordering him to stay still, eat this, drink that. 2 weeks passed before he could stand with support. Another week before he could manage short walks with a crutch Martha had fashioned. During this time, their relationship shifted subtly but profoundly. The careful distance they'd maintained dissolved in the intimacy of caretaking, Martha helping him wash. Samuel teaching her Apache words during the long, quiet hours. Both of them watching Rose flourish under their combined attention, One evening, as snow fell softly outside and Rose practiced writing her letters by the fire, Samuel spoke unexpectedly. My wife's name was Maria, Mexican father, Apache mother, caught between worlds, like you are now. Martha waited, understanding the gift of this confidence. When she died, I thought my heart went with her, built walls, lived alone, convinced myself it was enough. He paused, watching Rose form careful letters. Then you walked out of the desert, marked and discarded but unbroken. And this one? He nodded at Rose, wild and lost but reaching for life. My walls weren't strong enough for both of you. I'm glad, Martha said simply. He smiled then, the expression transforming his usually serious face. So am I. The next morning brought unexpected visitors, the boy from the trading post, leading a smaller child by the hand. Both looked half-starved despite the food Martha had been leaving out. My sister, the boy said defiantly, as if expecting to be turned away. She's sick. Martha was already moving, bringing them inside, checking the little girl's fever. Not serious, but compounded by hunger and cold. She settled them by the fire, Rose immediately taking charge of the boy, showing him her letters, sharing her food without being asked. Samuel watched from his seat, then spoke quietly to Martha. We'll need a bigger dwelling soon. She looked around, at Rose teaching, at the boy trying not to cry with relief, at his sister sleeping safe for perhaps the first time in months. Then at Samuel, who saw what she saw, who offered partnership in this unexpected calling. Yes, she agreed, we will. As she tended the sick child, Martha felt the truth of it settle into her bones. She'd walked into the desert with nothing but shame and silence. She'd found shelter with a man who knew about walls and wounds. Together, they'd begun building something neither had planned, a refuge for the lost, a family for the discarded, a place where broken things could heal and grow strong. Tomorrow, when Samuel was steadier, they'd start planning the expansion. Rose would help, proud to be part of making room for others. The trading post children would spread word, as they always did. And Martha would be ready, having learned that the heart, like the high desert itself, could be far more generous than anyone expected. The fire crackled, snow whispered against the brush walls, and Martha hummed softly as she worked, not the hymns of her old life, but something new, wordless and free. Around her, her chosen family settled into sleep, trusting her to keep watch, to keep them safe, to keep building this improbable life one rescued soul at a time. Spring arrived with melting snow and the return of the eagles to the canyon. Samuel's leg had healed strong, though he still favored it on cold mornings. The wickiup had grown, a second dwelling connected by a covered walkway, built with the help of his cousins who'd returned after the winter. The boy, Daniel, and his sister Sarah had stayed, adding their voices to Rose's in the evening lessons Martha conducted by firelight. It was on a morning bright with new sage that Samuel asked Martha to walk with him. Not unusual in itself, they often gathered plants together now, comfortable in shared silence. But something in his manner was different, formal in a way that made her pulse quicken. They climbed to a flat outcropping that overlooked the valley, their usual place for watching sunsets. Samuel had brought a bundle wrapped in soft leather. He set it down carefully, then stood facing her, his dark eyes serious. Martha, he began, then stopped, seeming to gather words like a man gathering stones for building. Among my people, marriage isn't papers and ceremonies like in your world. It's choice, made new each day. It's two paths becoming one path, walked together. Martha's breath caught, but she remained still, letting him speak. You came to me broken by others' cruelty. I was broken by loss. We've healed each other, built something good. The children call you mother now. You've made my empty house a home." He paused, then added with characteristic directness, "I want you for my wife, not by their laws, but by ours, by choice." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing a narrow band of braided leather decorated with small silver conchos and turquoise beads. Not a ring, something older, deeper. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "The one who was cast out, who found new life. If you accept it, you accept me. All I am, all I have. No papers, no ceremony with strangers watching. Just us, choosing." Martha looked at the band, understanding its weight. Not just marriage, but acceptance into his world fully. No going back to town respectability. No chance of being a proper widow ever again. But hadn't she already chosen that when she walked into the desert? "The children?" she asked. "Our children, all who come to us seeking shelter. Your people. Already consider you my wife, but they wait for you to choose it." Martha thought of Constance Hartley, of the church wedding with its white dress and promises made before God and the law. How hollow it had proved, how easily broken by death and blame. This was different. No witnesses but the sky. No authority but their own hearts. She held out her wrist. "Yes." Samuel's hands were steady as he tied the band, his fingers gentle on her skin. When he finished, he cupped her face in his hands, studying her as if memorizing every line. "My wife," he said simply. "My husband," she replied, the words feeling new and ancient at once. He kissed her then, their first kiss, under the wide sky with eagles calling overhead. Not passionate but profound, a seal on choices made and paths converging. When they returned to camp, Rose took one look at Martha's wrist and whooped with joy. "Finally," she exclaimed, making them both laugh. "Daniel owes me an arrowhead. I said it would be before the moon was full." That evening became a celebration. Samuel built the fire high, and Martha made the best meal their stores could provide. The children decorated her hair with early wildflowers, their faces bright with the security of parents who'd chosen each other, chosen them. As night deepened and the children settled to sleep, Martha and Samuel sat by the fire. The weight of the leather band on her wrist felt right, like something that had always been there. "No regrets?" Samuel asked quietly. Martha thought of all she'd given up, respectability, security, the life she'd been raised to want. Then she looked at what she'd gained: freedom, purpose, love that asked nothing but truth. "None," she said. "You." "I regret the years I spent alone, but perhaps I needed them to be ready for this." They moved into the wickiup together that night, no longer maintaining the polite fiction of separate spaces. Rose had already relocated her bedding to the new dwelling with Daniel and Sarah, wise beyond her years in understanding what the adults had taken so long to acknowledge. In the darkness, with Samuel's arms around her, Martha marveled at the journey. From that morning of judgment in the Hartley courtyard to this moment of being held, cherished, chosen, not for what she could provide or produce, but for herself alone. "Tell me about your grandmother," she whispered, "the one whose band I wear." Samuel's voice rumbled against her back as he spoke of the woman who'd been cast out but refused to surrender, who'd built a new life from ashes, who died surrounded by grandchildren who carried her strength forward. "You remind me of her," he finished, "not in looks but in spirit. She used to say the worst things that happen to us can become the door to our truest life." Martha turned in his arms to face him. She was right. The next weeks passed in a blur of ordinary happiness. Martha learned the Apache words for wife, for home, for the 100 small intimacies of married life. Samuel taught her to read the weather signs, to know which plants healed and which harmed, to move through the land as one who belonged there. The children thrived under their combined care. Rose's reading improved dramatically, and she began teaching the younger ones. Daniel showed aptitude for tracking and hunting, following Samuel with devoted attention. Little Sarah, health restored, revealed a voice clear as mountain water and sang constantly. Other children came, drawn by the mysterious network that connected the lost and abandoned. Some stayed only days, needing just food and rest before moving on. Others, like 10-year-old Margaret, who appeared with marks of violence on her arms, needed longer healing and chose to remain. It was Margaret who brought the first real test of their new union. 3 weeks after she'd arrived, a man came looking for her. Her uncle, he claimed, though the way Margaret hid behind Martha told its own truth. "A girl belongs with family," the man insisted. He was drunk, swaying slightly, but his hand rested on his gun. "Not with some Apache and his woman." Samuel stepped forward, but Martha touched his arm, moving past him to face the man directly. "She stays here," Martha said calmly, "unless she chooses to go. What gives you the right?" "The same thing that gives you none," Martha interrupted. "Love against harm, safety against fear. Ask her yourself, does she want to go with you?" Margaret pressed closer to Martha's back, trembling. Her silence was answer enough. The man's face darkened. "I'll be back with the law." "I do that," Martha said. "Explain to them why a child fears you and why she ran, what they'll find if they examine her closely." Their eyes locked, his bloodshot and angry, hers steady and immovable. She'd faced down Constance Hartley and her own shame. This man was nothing compared to that. He broke first, muttering curses as he stumbled back to his horse. They watched until he disappeared over the ridge. Then Martha turned to gather Margaret in her arms. "He won't be back," she said with certainty. Men like that were cowards at heart, preferring easy victims to those who'd found protectors. That night, as the expanded family settled for sleep, Samuel pulled Martha aside. "You've changed," he said, but his tone was admiring. "The woman I found on the road wouldn't have stood so firm." "That woman was alone," Martha replied, "and this one has too much to protect." He drew her close, and she felt the truth of it. How love multiplied rather than divided. How each child they sheltered made them stronger rather than weaker. How the home they'd built from nothing had become a fortress against the world's cruelty. In the new dwelling, they could hear Rose reading to the younger ones, her voice confident and warm. The sound made Martha's throat tight with emotion she couldn't name. Joy too fierce for the word, gratitude too deep for thanks. "My grandmother would have been proud," Samuel murmured against her hair. "To see her band on someone who understands that the broken-hearted make the fiercest protectors." Martha fingered the braided leather, thinking of all the women who'd worn it before her, all who'd chosen love over safety, freedom over acceptance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more mouths to feed, more hearts to heal, perhaps more uncles or authorities demanding return of what they'd forfeited through cruelty. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, wife by choice, mother by compassion, woman by her own definition. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but here in this circle of dwellings lit by banked fires and filled with sleeping children. Those struggles had meaning, had victory, had love. "I come to bed," Samuel said softly. "Tomorrow's work will wait." She followed him into their home, no longer a refugee or a widow or an outcast, but simply Martha, chosen and choosing, building a life from the ashes of the old, proving with every breath that sometimes the greatest revenge against cruelty is the audacity to be happy. The morning arrived with thunderclouds building over the canyon, matching the tension in Martha's chest. She'd seen the dust trail yesterday, too organized to be traitors, too deliberate to be drifters. Now, as she helped Sarah braid her hair, she heard the horses approaching. Judge William Harris rode at the front, his black coat pristine despite the desert dust. Behind him came Constance Hartley, her face set in lines of righteous determination, and two men Martha recognized as deputies from Rock Springs. They stopped at the edge of camp, taking in the scene, the expanded dwellings, the children pecking out from doorways. Samuel standing calm but watchful near the fire. "Mrs. Hartley," the judge began, then corrected himself with pointed emphasis. "Or whatever you call yourself now. We need to discuss your situation." Martha finished Sarah's braid, patted the child's shoulder, and stood. She smoothed her Apache dress, touched the leather band on her wrist for courage, and walked forward. Samuel moved to stand beside her, not in front, not behind, but as her equal. "Judge Harris," she acknowledged. "Mrs. Hartley, to what do we owe this visit?" Constance couldn't contain herself. "Living in sin, corrupting children, abandoning all decent Christian behavior." The judge raised a hand for silence. "There are concerns about the children in your care. Reports of runaways being harbored here. Questions about whether this is a suitable environment." "Suitable," Martha repeated, tasting the word. "Was it suitable when Margaret's uncle beat her? When Daniel and Sarah were starving behind the trading post? When Rose was sleeping in the wild?" "These children have families," Constance started. "Had families," Martha interrupted, "who failed them, harmed them, or died trying, and now they have us." "You have no legal standing," the judge said. "No marriage certificate, no adoption papers, no authority recognized by the territory of New Mexico." Martha felt the old fear trying to rise, the weight of law and propriety and everything she'd been raised to respect. Then she looked at the children watching from the doorways, at Samuel steady beside her, and found her spine straightening. "I have something better than papers," she said. "I have their trust, their choice to stay, their laughter at night instead of tears." She reached into her pocket and pulled out something she'd carried since that morning in the Hartley courtyard. Thomas's wedding ring, the one she'd left in the dirt. She'd gone back for it weeks later, not from sentiment but as reminder. "You want to talk about legal standing?" She held up the ring. "This gave me legal standing once, made me respectable, part of your world." She looked directly at Constance. "It also gave you the right to shame me, shear me like a sheep, drive me out to die." The deputies shifted uncomfortably. One of them had been in the crowd that day. "So no," Martha continued, "I don't have papers. I have something your laws never gave me. Dignity, safety, the right to choose my own life." "This is nonsense," Constance spat. "You're living with a savage, collecting abandoned brats, pretending to be some kind of mother." Rose's voice cut through clear and strong. The girl emerged from the dwelling, followed by the other children. They arranged themselves around Martha and Samuel, not hiding, not cowering, but claiming their place. "She's our mother," Rose repeated, facing the judge. "He's our father. Not by your papers, but by choice, by love, by showing up every day and caring what happens to us." Daniel stepped forward, 12 years old and fierce. "You want to take us back? To what? Empty streets and empty bellies?" "To proper homes," the judge said, but his certainty was wavering. "To civilization. I've seen your civilization." Margaret spoke up, voice shaking but determined. "It leaves bruises. It locks doors at night for the wrong reasons. It says suffering builds character while it builds nothing but fear." The judge looked at each child in turn, clean, fed, clear-eyed. Then at Martha and Samuel, the obvious care between them, the way the children naturally gravitated to their protection. "The law," he began. Your law, Samuel spoke for the first time. Not ours. We have our own ways. Older than your papers. Marriage by choice. Family by heart. Justice by truth rather than rules. Regardless, the judge said, rallying his authority, these children are free to go, Martha interrupted. Any time they choose, ask them, here, now, with no threat or coercion, who wants to leave? Silence stretched. The children pressed closer to Martha and Samuel. Even little Sarah, too young to fully understand, gripped Martha's skirt with determined fists. The judge's face showed he hadn't expected this. Constance, however, wasn't finished. You're still married to my son in the eyes of God and law. This arrangement is adultery and blasphemy. I demand— Martha pulled the ring off her finger and held it out. Then take it back. Take your son's name, your family's claim, everything you think binds me to you. Constance recoiled as if the ring were a snake. I release any connection to the Hartley family. Martha continued, her voice carrying across the camp. I return what was given and reclaim what was taken. My hair has grown back. My shame has become strength. Your son, her voice gentled slightly. Thomas was a good man who died too young. But I won't die with him to satisfy your grief. She dropped the ring at Constance's feet. It landed in the dust with a small puff, insignificant for all the weight it had carried. If that's not enough, Martha added, then know this. Every woman in Rock Springs knows what you did to me. They whisper about it when you pass. Some admire it. Others fear it could be them next. Do you really want a public hearing about the Christian charity of cutting a widow's hair and casting her out? The judge cleared his throat. Perhaps. Perhaps we should consider this matter settled. The children appear well cared for. No formal complaints have been filed. This is outrageous, Constance's voice cracked. You're going to leave them here with these people, Martha supplied calmly. Just people, Mrs. Hartley, building a life, caring for children no one else wanted. Crimes, apparently, in your world. The judge was already turning his horse. I see no legal violation here. The territory has bigger concerns than domestic arrangements. He tipped his hat to Martha, a gesture that made Constance gasp. Good day. The deputies followed, clearly relieved. Constance sat frozen on her mount, staring at Martha with a mixture of rage and something else, perhaps the dawning recognition that her power had limits. That cruelty could be survived and transformed. You killed my son, she whispered. No, Martha said gently. But you're killing yourself with hate. I pray someday you find peace. She turned her back on her former mother-in-law and walked to her children. They surrounded her with fierce hugs and excited chatter. Samuel's hand found hers, solid and warm. Constance left without another word, a diminished figure disappearing into the distance. The storm clouds that had threatened all morning began to break apart, letting through shafts of sunlight that painted the canyon walls gold. Will they come back? Sarah asked in a small voice. No, Samuel said with certainty. They have no power here. As if to prove his point, Rose started laughing, pure, delighted sound that spread to the other children. Soon they were all laughing, even Martha, the sound echoing off the rocks like freedom itself. That evening, as rain finally came to settle the dust and cool the air, they gathered for dinner as always. But something had shifted. The children sat easier, laughed louder, moved with the confidence of those who knew they were truly safe, truly chosen, truly home. Martha served the meal she'd prepared, venison stew rich with wild herbs, bread studded with piñon nuts, the first greens of spring. Simple food made with love, received with gratitude. No blessing was spoken, but the meal itself was prayer. Thanksgiving for survival, for transformation, for the family they'd built from fragments. As night fell and the children settled to sleep, Martha and Samuel sat by the fire. The leather band on her wrist caught the firelight, and she thought of all the women who'd worn it before. Survivors, builders, those who'd chosen love over safety. No papers, she murmured. No authority, just us. Just us, Samuel agreed, pulling her close. And them, and whoever else finds their way here seeking shelter. Martha smiled, thinking of Constance's horror at their arrangement. If only she knew the full truth, that from her cruelty had grown this abundance, from her casting out had come this gathering in, from her attempt to shame had risen this proud, strange, beautiful life. The fire crackled, sending sparks up towards stars now visible through the cleared clouds. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called and was answered. The sound no longer frightened Martha. She was part of this landscape now, as rooted as the ancient junipers, as enduring as the stone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more children perhaps, more needs to meet, more small rebellions against a world that preferred its people broken and sorted into proper categories. But tonight, she was simply a woman who'd walked through fire and found home on the other side, surrounded by the family she'd chosen and who'd chosen her in return. The last ember settled in the fire pit. Samuel banked it carefully for the night, and they walked together to their dwelling. Through the doorway, Martha could see the children sleeping, Rose with an arm flung over Sarah, Daniel muttering in his dreams. Margaret curled tight but no longer fearful. "My wife," Samuel said softly, wonderingly, as if the word still surprised him. "My husband," she replied, and kissed him under the vast desert sky. Inside, settling into their bed, Martha touched the leather band one more time. In the morning, she would rise and make breakfast and teach letters and tend gardens and be all the things she'd never expected. Mother, wife, keeper of sanctuary, woman unashamed. But for now, she simply lay in Samuel's arms and listened to the rain on the brush roof, grateful beyond words for the strange turnings that had led her here. Constance Hartley had meant to destroy her. Instead, she'd set her free. The territory of New Mexico slept under clearing skies. In a canyon where the wind sang through stone and water bubbled eternal from the earth. A small settlement of the dispossessed and reclaimed dreamed peaceful dreams. And Martha, no longer Hartley, no longer widow, no longer anything but herself, smiled in the darkness and called it good.